One of the most outdated and limiting beliefs that persists today is the idea that you should simply go to school, get good grades, secure a job, work tirelessly, save as much money as you can get out of debt, and then invest whatever's left in the stock market for long-term growth. This traditional path has been sold to generations as the safe and smart route to success. But in today's fast-changing world, that model no longer guarantees financial freedom or prosperity. It's a one-size-fits-all formula that often leaves people struggling, stressed, and stuck in a cycle of working just to survive. The truth is, this outdated model doesn't take into account the realities of inflation, global economics, or how money is actually created and manipulated. Take a moment to think about it. Why? Would anyone save money today when central banks around the world are printing trillions of dollars out of thin air? The value of money is being diluted, and the purchasing power of your hard-earned savings is slowly being eaten away. In such a system, merely saving cash doesn't protect or grow your wealth. It actually causes you to fall behind. That's why the gap between the ultra-rich 1% and the remaining 99% of the population keeps getting wider with each passing year. But here's the thing. This issue goes far beyond just money or income. You have to zoom out and see the larger picture, the systems, mindset, and rules that shape our financial lives are all interconnected, and most of us were never taught how they truly work. Redefining financial identity, so the question arises, what should you do instead? How do you escape the trap of outdated thinking and create a life of true financial independence? The first step is recognizing that within each of us, there are multiple financial identities shaped by our upbringing, beliefs, and education. Inside me, for example, there's still a poor person dad. Part of me shaped by scarcity, doubt, and fear. There's also a middle-class person who craves safety, seeks job stability, and believes in playing by the rules. That version of me looks for predictable paychecks, insurance plans, and retirement funds. But then there is the rich person, the visionary, the one who understands leverage and how money really works. The truth is, all of these identities live within each of us. But the system we grow up in only nurtures one of them. Sadly, we are not taught how to develop the mindset of the wealthy. Instead, we are conditioned to follow a narrow, linear path. Go to school, get a job, work for a paycheck, retire at 60. This system doesn't prepare us to be financially free. It prepare us to be dependent, obedient, and afraid of stepping outside the norm. If you've ever read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you will know that one of the core lessons from the authoress Rich Dad is about rejecting the idea of being paid just for your time. His rich dad refused to pay him for doing work. Why? Because he wanted to teach a deeper lesson that a paycheck can actually be one of the most harmful things to your growth. When you get used to receiving a fixed amount of money for a fixed amount of work, you start thinking like an employee, and that's where the limitation begins. The moment you accept a paycheck as your main source of income, you also accept a mindset of dependency and limitation. You wait for someone else to value your time and permit you to. But the wealthy think differently. They focus on building assets, creating value, taking calculated risks, and letting their money work for them. That's the mindset we're not taught in schools. And it's the very mindset that can lead to real freedom. My rich dad never gave me a paycheck. And that was one of the most powerful lessons. He taught me a lesson that clashed heavily with what my poor dad believed. You see, my poor dad worked as a government employee, and he couldn't comprehend the idea of working without being paid. It absolutely drove him crazy. He would often say things like, "You've got to pay people, you've got to be fair, and compensate them." But Rich Dad wasn't saying that money or paychecks were evil. He was saying something deeper. He didn't want to become a slave to money. He didn't want his life or freedom to be tied to a fixed income or someone else's approval. As an entrepreneur, I came to understand what he meant. When you build the mindset of an entrepreneur, you don't rely on a paycheck to survive. If one business fails, you move on and build another one. You don't sit around waiting for someone to hand you security. You create your own. That's the difference. I don't need anyone else to take care of me. If a government or system doesn't support entrepreneurs or free thinkers like me, I don't argue why. Just move to a place where entrepreneurs are needed and welcomed. Because in reality, entrepreneurs are in demand all over the world. They create solutions, jobs, and innovation. But entrepreneurship isn't just about owning a business. It's really about a mindset, a way of thinking, operating, and approaching problems. It also involves developing a certain set of skills and playing by an entirely different rule book. People often assume that a small business owner and an entrepreneur operate the same way as a large corporation or employee, but that's simply not true. The rules that apply to employees don't apply to entrepreneurs. And the skill sets in thinking that work in a traditional job setting won't help you much when you're retrying to build something from scratch. That's why it's so important to understand that being an entrepreneur starts in the mind. You need to unlearn what you've been taught about security and stability and instead learn how to take calculated risks, adapt quickly, and think outside the box. Whether you're an employee or running a small business, your path and the tools you need are completely different. If someone has never been an entrepreneur before and they're thinking about taking that leap of faith into this unknown world, they need to understand it as more than just a career move. There's a whole new way of living. The last paycheck, a turning point. If I had to give just one piece of advice to someone standing on the edge, wondering whether or not to jump into entrepreneurship, I'd share a story from my own life. I still remember the day I received my final paycheck. It was both one of the worst and best days of my life. I was in Puerto Rico at the time, working for Xerox. I held that check and thought, wow, this is a lot of money. But almost instantly, I was disturbed because it came with taxes, limitations, and most importantly, it came with dependence. That moment marked a turning point. Shortly after that, a coworker named John approached me. He looked at me and said, "You're going to be back." I asked him why he thought that. He replied confidently, "Because you're going to fail." His words hit me hard. He had tried to leave before, failed, and ended up returning to Xerox. He was projecting his own fears and failures onto me. But I looked at him and thought, no, that's not going to be my story. I won't come crawling back. I won't let failure define me. I might fall, yes, but I'll get back up and try again. That's the essence of the entrepreneurial mindset. The courage to break free from comfort zones, the willingness to fail forward, and the determination to never settle for less than what you're capable of building. You see, when my colleague told me I'd be back after failing, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You failed and came back, but I'm going to fail and never come back." That right there is the kind of mindset that separates those who stay stuck from those who rise. It's not arrogance, it's conviction. It's the belief that even if I stumble, I will move forward, not backward. I won't run back to safety or comfort. I won't seek shelter in the familiar just because things got tough. That's the essence of the entrepreneurial attitude. Burn the bridges behind you, so there's no going back. A lot of people say things like, well, if I failed, I'll just move back in with my parents or I'll return to my old job. And while that might sound practical, that kind of backup plan becomes a crutch. It conditions your mind to accept defeat before even truly trying. It tells your subconscious that failure is an acceptable outcome, one you're already prepared to embrace. But real entrepreneurs think differently. When I first became an entrepreneur, it wasn't because I had a brilliant business idea or a pile of savings. I had nothing of money, no financial cushion, and no steady income. For years, I lived without a paycheck. I struggled. I scraped by. But that's exactly what my rich dad wanted me to experience. He used to say, when you don't have a paycheck, you become hungrier, sharper, and more creative. Without that comfort zone of regular income, you're forced to figure things out. You're tested, not just financially, but morally and emotionally. You have to ask yourself, who will I become when I'm desperate? Will I give in to corruption, take shortcuts, cheat others, or abandon my value? Or will I rise above it and grow into someone better? And that's where the true power of entrepreneurship lies. It's not just about building businesses or making money yet. That's about discovering who you are when everything is stripped away. When you have nothing, that's when you get to meet your real self. That's when you develop character, resilience, and inner strength. But most people never experience that because they're too afraid to step outside their safe little world. They don't look beyond their immediate discomfort. They think, what will happen to me? Instead of asking, what can I learn from this? Or how can I grow through this? The evolving world and obsolete beliefs. You have to shift your focus to the big picture. Life will always come with challenges, setbacks, and surprises. But if you zoom out and take a broader view, you'll notice something amazing every time something bad happens. There's an opportunity for something good to follow. Every hardship plants the seed of growth. But for that to happen, you have to be mentally, emotionally, and financially prepared. If you go into the future expecting the next 20 years to be just like the last 20, you're setting yourself up for failure. The world is changing rapidly, and those who don't adapt will get left behind. Or worse, crushed by the wave of change. You know how we always check the expiration date when we buy something like a carton of milk at the supermarket? We don't want to consume something that's gone bad. It's just common sense. But what most people don't realize is that they never stop to check the expiration date on their mindset, their beliefs, or the knowledge they operate on. They're still using ideas and strategies that expired decades ago. And that's why they keep getting outdated, frustrating results, financially and personally. Most people believe the goal is to get out of debt as fast as possible. But I do the opposite. Learn how to use debt as a tool. I just recently refinanced $300 million in debt. By doing that, I cut my interest rate from 5% down to 2.5%. That one move made me a fortune. Why? Because my cost of borrowing went down, and now I'm making more money every single month. Instead of fighting debt, I've made it work for me. This is what financial education should teach, not just how to avoid debt, but how to strategically use it. When I returned from serving in Vietnam in January 1973, my rich dad gave me one piece of advice that changed my life. He said, go to school to learn how to invest in real estate. But it wasn't just about property, it was about understanding how to leverage debt and taxes. That's what makes the rich rich. These two elements, when mastered, allow wealth to grow at an accelerated rate. On the flip side, debt and taxes are exactly what crush the middle class and poor, especially those who don't understand how the system works. Even professionals like doctors and lawyers, people you'd assume are financially secure. One of my doctor friends was thrilled recently because he finally made $1 million. He was proud of himself. And the reason is simple. I don't earn money by working for it in the traditional sense. I create businesses and invest in assets like real estate. That's why lesson number 1 in Rich Dad, Poor Dad is this. The rich don't work for money. If you work for money, your income is heavily taxed. But if you earn money through entrepreneurship and investments, you can control how much tax you pay, and in many cases, you can legally reduce it to 0. So here's what I do. Every time I earn $1 million as an entrepreneur, I immediately roll it into real estate. That real estate then allows me to get a 4-2-1 stack, meaning I put in $1 million and the bank gives me $4 million in return. That's leverage. That's the power of knowing how money works. That's also why I love banks, not because they're ethical, but because they offer tools that, if you're financially educated, you can use to build wealth much faster than the average person ever could. It's true. The same banks that work well for investors like me often hurt everyday people. Most people are encouraged to save money, but when the government prints trillions of dollars, savers get punished. Why? Because printing devalues currency. That's why I say, when money is printed, people who save and work for money get crushed. But people who understand that people who borrow to invest tax you and become wealthier in a system designed this way, debt and taxes will always favor the rich and burden the rest. This is why holding on to outdated beliefs leads to failure. When your ideas are obsolete, your results become obsolete. So many people are still clinging to this idea that success comes from going to school, getting a stable job, working hard, saving every penny, getting out of debt, buying a house, and investing for the long term in the stock market. That formula may have worked 50 years ago, but today it's broken. The world has changed, and so must your thinking. The world as we knew it changed drastically back in 1971. That was the year President Richard Nixon took the United States off the gold standard. It may seem like just a historical event, but its implications were massive. That one decision transformed the very nature of money from something backed by gold to something based entirely on debt. From that point on, money was no longer tied to a tangible asset. It became a promise, a liability, and a tool of control through inflation and taxation. Now, some people wonder if education has become so outdated. Should we just get rid of schools altogether? Would the world be better off without formal education? The answer is not to throw education away, but to recognize that our current system is based on obsolete principles. Once upon a time, education was one of the most valuable tools a person could have. But today, in the age of rapidly advancing technology and global change, traditional schooling simply can't keep up. It's not about having no education, it's about having the right kind of education. Let's take Moore's Law, for example. It states that information doubles roughly every 18 months. That means what you learn today could be outdated in a year and a half. So imagine spending 4 years in college. By the time you graduate, half of what you studied is already irrelevant. That's why the old model of go to school, get good grades, get a job doesn't work anymore. The pace of change is too fast. When people finish school, they step into a world that S already moved past, the knowledge they paid so much to acquire. I often meet people who proudly tell me they went to Harvard or some other prestigious university, and I always ask, when was that? Most say decades ago. The reality is, no matter how great your degree was, if you're still operating based on what you learned 30 or 40 years ago, you're operating on expired knowledge. Meanwhile, the world has shifted. Today, we're even seeing something unheard of. Banks are charging you to save money. That's right, negative interest rates. That's because banks don't even want your money anymore. There's simply too much of it floating around. This excessive printing of money is leading to bubbles in real estate, in stocks, and in consumer goods. Investors are dumping cash because they know what's coming. That's why I often say, savers are losers and cash is trash. It might sound harsh, but it's the truth in this current economy. And yet, despite all of this, people are still clinging to the dream of a high-paying job, thinking that that's the path to security. That thinking is outdated. That dream belongs to another time, another system that no longer functions the way it once did. People also believe getting out of debt is the smart thing to do, but that's another obsolete idea. In today's world, if you want to build real wealth, you need to learn how to get into good debt, the kind of debt that works for youth, that builds cash flow, creates assets, and multiplies your income. But schools never teach that. Schools don't teach you how to use debt, and they certainly don't teach you about taxes. That's why the gap between the 1% and the 99% continues to grow. The rich understand how the system works. They use debt and tax strategies to their advantage. And here's the critical piece. When governments print more and more money, two things happen: inflation and increased taxation. Prices go up, and so do the taxes you're forced to pay. That double pressure crushes the poor and middle class while the wealthy get richer. Why? Because the rich aren't working for money. They're not saving money. They're investing, leveraging, and moving their income through smart financial vehicles. The system rewards knowledge, not hard laboring. If you're not financially educated, you'll get left behind. Entrepreneurship, more than just profit. Many aspiring entrepreneurs jump into business with a single goal in mind: to make money. They think, I'll just start a business, generate income, and become wealthy, because that's the common narrative they've been fed. But that idea is a shallow understanding of what entrepreneurship truly is. Anyone who believes that entrepreneurship is just about chasing profit really needs to pause and take a deeper look to smell the roses, so to speak. Real entrepreneurs aren't just in it for the money. They operate from a different mindset, one grounded in purpose, strategy, and value creation. Let's look at some numbers to put things in perspective. In America, there are around 28 million small business owners. Out of those, about 24 million are solo entrepreneurs, meaning they are the only person in their business. These are called known employee entrepreneurs, essentially self-employed people. And while that may sound impressive, the reality is that many of them are not truly functioning as business owners. They're just working for themselves. There's a huge difference between being self-employed and being a true entrepreneur. The biggest misconception people have is equating self-employment with entrepreneurship. Yes, you're technically running a business if you're self-employed, but you're also wearing all the hats. The boss, the worker, the accountant. In this setup, you're trading time for money, just like an employee does. And here's the shocking truth: self-employed individuals actually pay the highest taxes. Nobody really talks about this, but it's a financial trap that too many fall into without understanding how the system works. People often call it the entrepreneurial spirit, but that phrase can be misleading. True entrepreneurship isn't just about hustling on your own. It's about building systems, assets, and teams that work without you. And more importantly, it's about understanding internal economics just as much as external ones. See, everyone has an external economy. Things like inflation, job markets, recessions, but equally important is your internal economy, your mindset, and your ability to respond and adapt regardless of what's happening out there. The power to shift your internal economy lies within you. It's your willpower, your vision, and your resilience. While some people get caught up in fear because of bad headlines or economic downturns, real entrepreneurs stay focused. Personally, I can see the good and the bad in the world, but I don't let it define me. I don't panic because I know I'm going to be successful no matter what. My internal economy is strong, and that gives me the power to create wealth even when external circumstances look grim. On the flip side, if someone has a poor internal economy, meaning a mindset stuck in scarcity, fear, or hopelessness, then no matter how good the outer world is, they'll still struggle. They'll only see obstacles, not opportunities. These people won't be able to generate income in any economy because they lack the understanding, tools, and confidence to do so. Meanwhile, a middle-class mindset functions in a middle-class way, wants comfort, safety, and routine, a stable job, a house in the suburbs, a car on loan, and a predictable life. When someone loses their job, especially if they've relied on it for years, it often feels like a complete disaster. Their world collapses, their sense of identity shakes, and fear takes over. That's because their livelihood was dependent on something outside of themselves, something they couldn't fully control. But for an entrepreneur, this scenario doesn't carry the same weight. Why? Because entrepreneurs never rely on the job in the first place. They create value, solve problems, and build systems. So losing a job isn't even part of their world, and if something collapses, they pivot. This is what I learned from visionary thinker Buckminster Fuller. Every situation has at least two sides. There's no such thing as a one-sided reality. For every perceived negative, there's also a potential positive. So when someone says the economy is terrible, what they're actually expressing is that their economy is struggling. Their mindset and financial strategies are failing them. But someone else living in the same external economy might be thriving. Why? Because they've built and developed their internal economy, their mindset, their emotional strength, their ability to adapt. This concept is crucial. There's a difference between your economy and the economy. The former is something you control. The latter is something you can't. Entrepreneurs operated with what's called an internal focus, meaning they work on developing themselves, their thinking, their habits, their skill sets rather, than depending on external conditions. When they encounter failure or setbacks, they don't collapse. They say, "Great! What can I learn here? How can I bounce back stronger?" This mindset keeps them climbing, regardless of circumstances. Contrast that with the average person. When something goes wrong, they panic. They might numb their feelings with distractions, medication, or They treat failures like identity crushers instead of stepping stones. And it's important to say mistakes matter. Mistakes are not meaningless. They show us what we don't know, what we need to learn. But a real entrepreneur uses those lessons as fuel. They don't stay down. They rise higher because of those very mistakes. They build mental resilience, wisdom, and long-term confidence. That's why the entrepreneurial mindset is so powerful. It's not just about money, it's about who you become. When you're strong internally, the external world doesn't control your destiny. But people with weak internal mindsets are often driven by fear of change, fear of failure, fear of losing control. Ironically, these fears usually manifest exactly what they're trying to avoid. People terrified of losing their jobs often end up losing them because their thoughts, actions, and energy are aligned with fear, not growth. Everything in life flows through you. Your thoughts shape your decisions, and your decisions shape your results. So, an entrepreneur's first and most important task is to master their inner world. That means controlling your beliefs, your reactions, and your focus. It means developing a mindset that says, no matter what happens out there, I can respond powerfully in here. Because the moment you accept a paycheck, you've accepted someone else's control. If you want to break free, you need to become stronger on the inside than the pressures you face on the outside.